study, Shannon and Warren Weaver, they proposed this model that is called as Shannon and Weaver model of communication, which was proposed in the year 1949. Claude E. Shannon was an American mathematician and electronic engineer, and Weaver was an American scientist, and both of them joined together to propose to write an article for the Bell Systems Technical Journal that is also called as mathematical theory of communication, and also that is the same which is also called as Shannon and Weaver model of communication of 1949. As the same way, it is also a linear model, one way model of communication, which means the communication is the process is happening in one direction only. Based on this model, there are many communication studies have been conducted. According to this Shannon and Weaver, communication is composed of uh, five elements and noise. First is the information source, second one is the transmitter, third one is the channel, fourth one is the receiver. Then you have fifth one is the destination. Then they also added the noise. Here, if you see the Shannon and Weaver model, again the feedback is lacking. According to Shannon and Weaver, there are five elements in the communication process. Along with that, there is a concept they introduced called as noise. So here, the first one is the information source. Information source is nothing but like a source or any other individual who is wishing to communicate some message towards the end of the receiver. So, as you already know, receiver is the target of any message. Without the receiver, we cannot communicate. Okay. So here, information source is sending a message. So Shannon and Weaver, they joined together to find out how to send maximum information through a given channel. They used radio waves and cables to pass that information from one point to another point. Those were the channels of their communication. So here, the information source is the one who is someone who is sending some messages towards the receiver. Here, if you see the transmitter, the second element, the transmitter is changing the messages which is sent by the source into a signal, electrical signal, and that electrical signal is passing through the channel, then that is being received by the decoder or the receiver, then that is reaching the destination. So here the transmitter is an important element that is changing that messages into electrical signals which are carried by the channel, the telephone cables or the radio waves which are acting as the channels of communication, then that is being received by the receiver. Okay, your destination is the one who is again perceiving the information. As you already know, decoding process happens within the cell. So here the receiver is something, for example, if it is a communication over the phone, the information source is the one person who is encoding a message, then that messages are changed by the transmitter or the cable wires which are going to connect the both source and the receiver. Then that channel, these electrical signals are passing through the cables, and at the end of the other person there, the receiver, the receivers, whoever is there, where again the telephone receiver, the headset is the one which is receiving, then the person is receiving the communication. So here destination is the brain of the concerned person, where the understanding or decoding again, process, the understanding happens. Or so here they introduced one more element called noise. The noise is something which disrupts the communication process. According to the Shannon and Weaver, noise can be anything. It can be a physical barrier, or it can be a mechanical barrier, or it can be a semantic barrier. Semantic barrier is nothing but which takes place within the receiver. They may perceive the information in a different way depending on their culture, depending on their attitude and behavior, etc. So, as you already know, there are individual differences within the self. Depending on those things, you also perceive the information in a different way. If it is a, for example, if it is a telephone conversation between the receiver and the source. So here the telephone cables are acting as the channels of communication. The headset of the concerned source is acting as the transmitter. Then the messages are changed by the transmitter as the signals. Then those are carried towards the receiver. The noise is something, if it is a mechanical barrier, the noise is something which is disturbing within the communication channel. So if the telephone headset is not functioning properly, or the cable wires which are not good enough, then there is a barrier which disturbs the communication process. So that is a mechanical barrier which is something which is disturbing the communication process. And again, there are maybe barriers within the source and also the receiver. If it is a source, generally, if the source is not able to communicate properly, or depending on the knowledge levels or communication skills, if that are disturbing the source in effectively communicating with the receiver, that is also a physical barrier which is within the self, that is acting as a barrier, and because of that the source will not be able to communicate with the receiver properly. So, in the same way, the receiver is somebody who is receiving communication from the source, and depending on here, the receiver, the attitude, the behavior, and also the other psychological factors, which may also hinder the receiver in receiving communication from the source. So, that can be a semantic barrier within the self, that is something which is disturbing the communication process. So, according to this Shannon and Weaver, any barrier which disturbs the communication process, that is called as a barrier. It can be a atmospheric barrier, physical barrier, or it can be a mechanical barrier, it can be a psychological barrier, or it can be any other message. Sometimes also it can be a barrier. So all those barriers, whatever may be the form of the barrier, that is clubbed under the common label called noise. So here noise is something which is disturbing the communication process. And if it is a conversation between the two individuals, what happens here? Our mouth is acting as the transmitter. Then the messages what we are encoding as a source, those messages are changed by this mouth called transmitter into the sound waves. And these sound waves are carried from the source towards the receiver, and the air is becoming as the channel of the communication, and towards the end the receiver is receiving the communication with their ears. And if it is the interpersonal communication, all your senses act as the uh, receivers of the communication. So all your five senses you use in perceiving the message which is sent by the source. So that is Shannon and Weaver model of communication. According to this, we have five elements in the communication process, and along with that, we have noise. Here, information source is the one who is sending some information. Whatever message he or she is communicating, that is being changed by the transmitter as a signal, and the signals are carried through the channel. And at the end of that, the receiver is somebody who is receiving the signals, decoding the information, and that is reaching the receiver. And the noise is something which is the first model which introduced the concept of noise. This noise is something, it can be any kind of barrier which is interfering with the process of communication, that is noise.